the representation of First Nation governments in economic development of reserve lands, the drafting of land management agreements, and consultation and accommodation involving numerous governmental and corporate bodies. Alex is a fellow at the Institute of Municipal Finance and Governance and is the former chair of Community Legal Education Ontario. So welcome. Our next panelist, who I'd invite to come up, is Melissa Goldstein. Melissa is a community activist and affordable housing advocate in Toronto. She's a policy researcher and organizer with the Parkdale Neighbourhood LandTrust. She is also chair of Housing Action Now, a really important advocacy group, and a member of the Toronto Open Smart Cities Forum. And to keep, yes, sorry. And to keep all of these folks going and in line, so we get through our evening and get the audience into the discussion, is our moderator, Mariana Valverde. Come on up. She's an internationally renowned expert on urban law and governance. She is the author of 7 books, including Everyday Law on the Street, City Governance in the Age of Diversity, which is based on her research in Toronto. She's a professor at the University of Toronto Centre of Criminology and Sociolegal Studies and is a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. You don't meet a lot of people who are progressive and also a fellow of the Royal Society, so that's...
I don't usually mention.
I know, I think I inserted that into your bio. Her most recent research project is on the governance of public-private infrastructure partnerships, mostly in Ontario. So welcome, Mariana, and again, quite a distinguished panel, and I'll turn it over to you to get us going.
Okay, so welcome.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is this not on, maybe?
Yes, they all should be on.
Oh, okay.
Except, wait a minute, I will be in real trouble with the person who does all the real work in the Center for Free Expression, Ange Holmes, who's our coordinator, because I'm supposed to also indicate that if you're interested in receiving email, I know you don't need more email, but receiving not frequent emails, but emails about the upcoming events of the Center for Free Expression. We have about 12 of these public panels and forums each year, as well as a film series. You can just, Ange is going to pass around these 2 lists where you can write your name and email address if you would like to be added to our mailing list. Sorry for the commercial. Mariana, over to you.
Okay, so welcome everybody. So the format is going to be something that I hope gets everybody involved. So we'll start out with some questions to the panel, each person with a slightly different question that will open up some issues and provide some initial information, and then we'll have a bit more follow-up questions. Either I'll ask them or the panel can ask questions of each other, which could be interesting. And then after about 45 minutes or so, then we'll move to questions from the audience. And Brenda McPhail, who's here and who chaired the first panel in the series of 2, made a very valiant effort to keep everybody to questions, only ask a question. But I think many of us who are repeat players in the community forum business will know that, you know, it's awfully easy to give a speech and then sort of put a little tiny question at the end, maybe. And maybe, since there are some people in the audience who actually know quite a bit about the matters of which we are talking, instead of trying to say, only questions, no comments. I'm still, I think, in the spirit of what Brenda was, trying to do by saying no speeches. But if you have a comment or a statement, or if you have information that's relevant, that's okay too. You don't have to spend 10 minutes trying to pretend that it's a question when it's not. So keep it really short, at 2 minutes. I don't know what will happen, but I think whatever you contribute can probably be said in 2 minutes, and if not, you can take your your place at the back of the queue again. So if we can keep the comments and questions short, and as I said, there are people in the audience who I know, there's other people I don't know, but I'm sure many of you have information, statements that are worthwhile. Just keep them really short. And remember that many of the people in the panel, they will have their little say at the beginning, but they know a heck of a lot more than they're going to be able to explain. So do think about good questions. Anyway, so as I think is clear from the poster, so I won't bore you trying to introduce the panel, what we thought would be useful is that because there's been all of this talk about this smart city project and Google and all of this, and a lot of people are getting caught up in the details that are the ones that Google wants us to talk about, like, would you like the sensors to be only on, public spaces or on the streetcars, or as, Sadia Mufazar put it when she was here, 2 weeks ago, would you like your Trojan horse to be red or green? So, which I thought was a very good way of putting it. Instead of talking about all these details, we want to step back. I mean, the reason we want to have this panel is to step back and say, okay, let's ask the basic questions of local democracy. And those questions are, who decides? And to whom are those people and organizations accountable? Those are the real questions, and we have to talk about those questions before we can start talking about whether some particular kind of bike path is better than some other. So, this is a big ideas kind of panel, really, and those are the discussions we often don't have because we're often caught up in some detail. So I'm really happy that everybody's here because we have an excellent representation. So we're going to just start, and I think we're going to start with Julie because urban development in Toronto, after all, is mainly done by the private sector. And Julie has a lot of experience, as Jim explained, not only in condos and private housing, but also she did a city home building, I just found out. And so she has a lot of experience with how things happen, how they can be such that the private sector is involved, but there's public benefits out of it too. So a very general question to Julie would be, okay, so whether it's in terms of Quayside or the waterfront generally, how have things been going? How have things been, decided? But how could they go differently? Because I think we'd really like to talk about how things could be different, what we could do to shape things in a different way.
Okay. I am finding it really hard to ever walk away from this issue. I resigned July 30th of 2018, and it seems to me that every day I'm still compelled to come back and now be a citizen advocate. And I'm proud to do that, but it means that it's such a fundamentally important issue for our city. There's no doubt that when I was chair of investment in real estate, I was the most experienced developer with the most completed projects and the most business experience on the board. So I think that gives you some context. And I voted in dissent of the framework agreement on the record. And then the night before the PDA, I resigned because I did not believe that it was in the interest of Waterfront Toronto to have a voice jointly with a private company that was a limited liability company that was not transparent. So the true development process requires a process founded in exactness, not in generics. So it's even hard to pinpoint for me what role Sidewalk has as a stakeholder. In land development and construction, the accountability starts with land ownership. But here Sidewalk says we don't have an interest in the land. And I suggest that may be the start of the problem. If Sidewalk would pay fair market value for the land, they would be accountable as owners of the land for the process, the upkeep, the relationship with neighbors, property taxes, accountable to city departments, application fees would need to be paid, et cetera, et cetera. The rules and regulations would apply, and real business terms would be relevant. Instead, they have privileged status, in my opinion, that is unprecedented in this city and probably in this country. I've been told by the city planning people that they're really easy to deal with, and I've got to say that's a little insulting because without a doubt, if I presented watercolors that didn't have dimensions, heights, and were absent of supporting consultants' reports, and didn't pay application fees and didn't provide exactness and didn't own any land, I could say anything without being held to task. If you own land, you're accountable to lenders, partners, stakeholders, investors. You must be transparent and exact. Am I taking too much time? Okay, so as a developer, if you want to make change, you engage the best in class, but you're still required to account for current rules, regulations, defend your proposal should you wish to cause there to be amendments either in zoning, built form. You can't say we will have unprecedented flexible zoning without calling the planning department. Development's a comprehensive exercise. You can't do it piecemeal, and you certainly can't do it in silos. And even if you don't know business, think of this scenario. Someone says they are investing $50 million in you, your lands, and your city, but they can't tell you what they're spending the money on or who has been hired. Even though they apparently have not completed one building of any size, it doesn't matter that they have the right to experiment on prime land worth billions. And even the quayside land alone will house 2,000 families. There's been an invitation-only advice function where even the advice that's been given isn't actually accredited to anyone specifically. No business deal is ever done and with $50 million that's taken seriously without a single expenditure accounted for, without being audited in detail and transparent. There appears to be not a landowner with inherent responsibilities and not a developer with experience. 2 years from the RFP now, that's a lot of time. And we're still not looking at in-depth material. And I'm no further ahead understanding what will happen than when I first saw this. The great news, though, today, is the City of Toronto has proven itself to be democratic, as we'd all expected. They posted information about the Quayside project online. Why that's really fundamentally important is because if anyone doesn't like a project I'm doing, or likes a project I'm doing, they can go online, search the address, and find all the third-party reports and consultants' reports. And then I'm accountable to factual information that's publicly available. So it's great that the city has done that. But from the text, they make it very clear that they're not a party to the Plan Development Agreement and will not be an author of the MIDP. And they still call the MIDP a vision document. So my part is as an experienced business person, I fail to see how you can create a business plan when you're still in a vision document 2 years later. Sorry, was that too bad?
I just want to add,
Okay, sorry.
for people who haven't been following this with the close attention that Julie and I and some others have. So PDA is Plan Development Agreement, which was this document that was signed, or maybe not signed, who knows, July 31st of 2018. Despite its name, it's not a contract. And despite its name, it's not a city plan either. And as Julie said, it wasn't submitted to the planning department. So it has this bizarre sort of status. But the PDA is that July 31st agreement, which was publicly released. It's available on the Waterfront website, although today I was looking for it to refresh my memory. It took me exactly 30 minutes to find it, and I really know that website. And then the MDIP or MIDP
yeah.
that Julie referenced is this future document that does not yet exist, which once it's elaborated between Waterfront Toronto and the Google company or companies Sidewalk, because there's 6 different companies that are Sidewalk labs. Once it's elaborated, then it'll go to the city and the province and the feds, and then something will happen by way of consultation. So that's just so that if you're hearing these terms, you're not in the dark. Although, of course, it's easy to get confused, but I don't think the confusion is completely unintentional. So those, that's just to clarify some of the terms. And now other speakers may refer to the PDA or the MIDP. You'll know what it's about. So now we heard from Julie from the sort of, private sector side, how things ought to go, how they usually go, and how they didn't go. And now, Melissa speaking from the nonprofit housing and, community organizing sector, if you can address essentially the same question.
So how things could have gone. Democratic city building is led by the people. So that's the first kind of important distinction, I think. Democracy literally means the people rule. And so what does that look like when we're talking about making decisions about public space and public land? I think what we would do as part of a good process is we would start with robust public consultation and public engagement led by the government with the express purpose of defining the public interest. What are our goals? What are our priorities? What are our concerns? And then working together, we would develop a vision for what we want on the waterfront. We've done this with waterfront planning in the past. I think Paula's going to talk about that a bit. We do this in developing neighborhood and community plans. We've been doing this with the development of community benefits frameworks. Toronto has a lot of experience with these kinds of participatory processes. This is not something new to the city. If the government wanted to explore smart city development, whatever that means, then a critical part of a good democratic city building process would be meaningful public education to develop and build the public's literacy around the kind of technologies that could potentially be part of the project. What do they involve? What are the risks and opportunities? And then the public would be able to engage in an informed discussion about our future and make informed decisions about what they were interested in and what they weren't, what risks they were willing to take and what risks were just too much. These consultation and engagement processes are usually facilitated by consultants with no skin in the game, and so the government would issue a request for proposals to hire the consultants to do that consultation and engagement work. So an RFP to develop something on the waterfront would then be produced as a result of that conversation once what Torontonians want is identified and clarified. This is what we want, submit a proposal for delivering it. Ideally, the RFP would be developed in consultation with the public so that the public would have a say in what's being asked for and how proposals will be evaluated. The design of the RFP and the criteria used for evaluating proposals is everything. Transparency is critical. And then there's a lot of possibilities around what those RFPs could be. A design competition could be initiated for the entire area or parts of it. We've had that happen on the waterfront many times, and Waterfront Toronto did that many times. It could be a housing complex. It could be parks and public spaces. It could be smart infrastructure, a piece of smart infrastructure. We even saw what that process looked like last week with John Tory and the Housing Now initiative with 11 pieces of public land that are being slated for housing. That process there wasn't a developer or a private company that was involved in visioning those spaces. It was all city government initiated and led. It was at council, and they were debating what the evaluation process would look like. There were public deputations given over what what residents wanted, and I mean that's a super expedited, less democratic, less public involved process, and that still had a lot more opportunity for the public to actually engage and be part of that process than what's happening or what happened with Waterfront. So I think that's a general approach that should be taken when thinking about something as significant as what Quayside aims to be. That's how things could have gone. And that's why Quayside is such a problematic project, because the process that led to it in the first place was not democratic, not transparent, not accountable, and there was no public involvement. Waterfront Toronto's got a summary of how that process went on their website, and this is their approach. And their approach kind of makes that clear. In 2016, as we moved towards our next development project, Quayside, we asked ourselves, how do we build a more sustainable city in the face of climate change? How do we create places to live for people of all ages, abilities, and incomes? How do we create jobs and prosperity and support innovative new businesses? To help us answer these questions, ready? We thought about bringing on a partner that would not only help address pressing urban challenges like climate change, affordability, and creating jobs and prosperity, but also bring the financial capacity to fund the planning process. So on March 17th, Waterfront Toronto released the Quayside Innovation and Funding Partner Request for Proposal to the market through local, national, and international channels. The Innovation and Funding Partner was selected through a competitive RFP process, which was guided by a steering committee, process manager, and fairness advisor. So we have a process where Waterfront Toronto decides independently what they want to see on the waterfront. At no time do they consult with the public or even let the public know what's going on. It's Waterfront's priorities that are articulated in the request for proposals. It's Waterfront Toronto's priorities and values that are the basis for evaluating those proposals. And only once the contract is awarded is the public notified. But we aren't allowed to see the contract We aren't allowed to know who else submitted proposals. We aren't allowed to see those proposals, and we certainly aren't allowed to provide any input into what we think of the proposals, and that ship has sailed anyway. And that's in contrast to other Waterfront Toronto initiatives where the Jack Layton Ferry Terminal or any of the parks, they put out another competition. There were a lot of proposals submitted. People could go and look at those proposals. They were invited to submit feedback. It was a really engaged process. So the question here is like, why, when this is so much bigger and so much more important, was a completely different path pursued. So in the end, the proponent they chose to create and fund an experimental, globally significant community that will showcase advanced technologies, building materials, sustainability practices, and innovative models that demonstrate pragmatic solutions toward climate-positive urban development on the waterfront was a subsidiary of one of the biggest corporations on the planet that had only existed for 3 years at this point. The only project the company had completed was installing Wi-Fi hotspots around New York City, a relatively small project that has now been deemed unsuccessful in so many ways by so many people in New York. And this in spite of the fact that Waterfront Toronto's RFP required applicants to provide a description of 3 to 5 projects completed within the last 10 years, comparable in terms of size, type, and/or complexity, where possible, demonstrating the values of the approach outlined in the vision of your proposal. So it's obvious that if a fair evaluation was done, and that's a huge if, the priority here must have been money. Specifically, the applicant with the access to the most money to potentially spend on waterfront development wins the contract. And I think it's entirely fair to be questioning Waterfront Toronto about things like corruption, unethical decision-making, inappropriate influence, given their process, because inclusive, democratic, transparent, accountable processes, which is the opposite of what was done here, are not just designed to prevent those situations from happening, but to prevent the public from thinking they might have. And I think I'll leave there. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, so if we can now move to Councillor Fletcher, who might perhaps give us, slight ray of hope or something. I don't know, but she's going to explain the plan for the Portlands and talk about waterfront development.
Sure. Thank you. Do I need that? Can you hear? Okay. I had passed out 2 pieces of paper for everybody. One is the front cover of the Portlands Planning Framework, which was a number of years in the making and is all of the plans for the development of the Portlands. And we recently started a zoning consultation. So this was done with Waterfront Toronto and the city, and it's a comprehensive plan that exists. And I think it's important, there's a picture on the front as well. You can see that's the actual Portlands on that particular photo. And then the other piece of handout for you, because we're at a school, I thought everybody needed a handout, is this, which is the developed land in the waterfront area. But what it shows you is what's called the designated waterfront area. And it shows you where it runs from. This is where Waterfront Toronto has been, this is now under contract with Sidewalk Labs. So it runs from Dowling at the X all the way over to Leslie Street and the Leslie Street spit and the Portlands. So you can see it's a very large waterfront area. It also tells you where the parks might be, where the land that's developed already or not developed. And you can see the Portlands is basically not developed. And then you can see the little land part in there that is Quayside, which is here right by the Parliament Slip. It's a very small site, given the breadth of the central waterfront, the designated waterfront area. This is a 12.5 acre site, Quayside. It's not in my ward, so I'm not going to talk about Quayside, but what happened at the very beginning was that the RFP itself indicated that it was not just Quayside that was going to be part of this project, but it was Quayside and the eastern waterfront, that i.e. Portlands. I don't call it the Eastern Waterfront. Does anybody else call it the Eastern Waterfront? No. So when they came to see me, and they did come to see me. Who's they? Sidewalk. Doctorate came to see me with a couple of other people. And then here's the map. This is the map that was in the RFP. And the map that's in the RFP is Quayside, which is this 12.5 acres. And then you'll see a little blue bit there on yours. And then all of the Portlands, all 700 acres. So this is what was sent as showing what you'd be bidding on for the RFP. So when I saw that, I had a bit of a shock because it was never my understanding that this RFP for Quayside, which is to develop the smart city or the innovative city or be able to have pilots and everything else, included all of the Portlands. So that came out of the blue, although it shouldn't have surprised me because this RFP closed on April 27th, I think, 17. And on April 8th, I had gone down to Rebel nightclub because somebody had overdosed there the night before. And this is part of my job, not just developing, but people that kind of drug situation at some of these clubs, and they died. So I'd gone down to meet somebody from the media down there to talk about safe parties. And there was at least 30 people along the dock wall, and they had these cameras and they had everything. And I went for a little walk and they said, "You can't go here, you can't go here." I said, "Why? What's going on?" They said, "Sorry, we're making a movie. You can't go here. We're here." I said, "Well, who are you? Who's here?" He said, "Dan Doctorow's here from New York, Bloomberg." I said, "Who? I don't, what?" But I'm kind of the counselor, and I just want to walk along here. "I'm sorry, you can't go there. We're making a movie we're going to show this movie as part of this RFP." So I had an early introduction to that whole thing. I remembered that the other day because it was in the time since that went out. The issue around there's all these acronyms that Mariana has pointed out. There's the PDA, there's the FA, there's the MIDP, there's the BIP. So the framework agreement, as Julie will tell you, was the first thing that was signed. Very high-level agreement between Waterfront Toronto and Sidewalk Labs. And it was actually included the Portlands. It included the Eastern Waterfront. That, the second document, after a fair amount of pushback, that wasn't good enough because, as you know, everybody had to sign a non-disclosure agreement in order to read it, and you weren't allowed to talk about it. The Waterfront Toronto went back and then ended up with the PDA, Planned Development Agreement, which then, instead of having the Portlands, has what I showed you on that map, the designated waterfront area. But right up until, I think the date was, and that was signed on the 31st, the PDA, the city wrote a letter under the signature of the then acting city manager and to Waterfront Toronto and said, "I think you should probably focus on Quayside," many times in that letter, and I think somebody FOI'd it and has it. "You should really focus on Quayside. You don't really have the authority to have an agreement over the Portlands. Waterfront Toronto owns 10.5 acres. That's where you have your partner and your agreement." That was on June 23rd, 2018. And so I'm just giving you all the kind of thread. At that time, there was a document that said, still had Eastern Waterfront or Portlands in it. After the city sent the letter, and when this was signed on the 31st of July, it had changed from being the Portlands under this agreement as well to the designated waterfront area, and being allowed to think up things that may have a scale where they would be implemented somewhere along the entire waterfront. So if something's so good that you think up in Quayside, it could be applied somewhere else. But there's a very rigorous process to that. And I kind of see this as starting really big because they did really want their hands on the Portlands, and shrinking to being Quayside with scalable projects. And that's where this MIDP comes in, because that is what is being developed now, the Master Implementation Development Agreement. And that is between Waterfront Toronto and Sidewalk Labs. Originally, it was Waterfront Toronto and Sidewalk TO, which was a little more direct. And now there's some confusion around who's bidding for what and who's who, so it's pretty important to know who the partners are. They're Waterfront Toronto and Sidewalk Labs. And this development plan, Master Implementation Development Plan, has to be completed by September 2019. There's already discussions, this is February now, so there's a few months to go. But there should be and have to be fairly strong and wide and deep consultations that are to be led by Waterfront Toronto, that plan and any other plan that comes up, whether it's zoning or anything else, all has to go through city process. And that's the part I want to be really clear on. There's nothing at this point that has to go to the city. Although the city at the very beginning, back in January of 17, said, hold on, let's just be clear about what we think you should be doing with Sidewalk, and has been clear twice. That's the extent, because it's not come to us officially or formally. The consultations that would be underway by whomever's doing them, I know Sidewalk's doing something, Waterfront Toronto's supposed to do something. When the time comes, the city will also have a process for examining this plan. So the other thing that's important to know is that all of these projects, including the Villiers Island project, which is a precinct in the Portlands, it's all been approved, requires a business implementation plan. And that's for Waterfront Toronto to develop, and the city has to approve it. And I guess I'm saying these things because there are some structures around this process that are quite strong. There are already precinct plans for East Bayfront, for Keating, for Villiers Island. And East Bayfront and Keating Channel area, kind of Quayside is nested in there. So there's already plans that have been done. The business improvement plan for Quayside also has to be, sorry, not business improvement, that's for my BIAs. This is for the waterfront. Business implementation plan has to be prepared and turned into the city. That's the memorandum of understanding between the City of Toronto and Waterfront Toronto when it was set up as far as development is concerned. It's not a blank slate, it's not a blank check. There is a very clear pathway to approvals. Nothing, zero, has been approved at the city level. And so far, the framework agreement has been put in a drawer. The project development agreement has been signed but refined quite drastically with, you see the chart that was developed, what was in the framework agreement and what now is in the PDA. It was, I say there's a pretty big leash correction between the framework agreement and the project development agreement as far as what the scope of the entire project was. And then there's this other master implementation development agreement for September, and then it will go into a city process. It has to be filed at the city. And the business implementation plans have to be developed before anything can move forward. So everybody who's interested in this, who feels that they can't quite reach in, I believe there will be ways to reach in a very formal, structured manner once this gets to the city side. In fact, I know that will be the case, so that's what we can do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so Alex, if you want to continue on from Councillor Fletcher and say a bit more about sort of public control of these things and, just continue.
Sure. Part two. So as I'm sure most people in the room know, city governance is super messy. Even at the best of times, even with the kind of projects that Melissa spoke about, there's still lots of actors and many moving parts and, lots of acronyms. It can get very complicated. And this, I think this particular project is complicated by, in part, the very unusual nature of Waterfront Toronto as a body. It's an unusual beast. It's not like the usual agencies, boards, and commissions that we're used to, like the Toronto Transit Commission or the Toronto Community Housing Corporation, which we know as kind of connected to the city. Ultimately, the city is the body that's in charge, and they make the rules, and then these other bodies deliver. So it's not like that. But it's also not totally independent. It's not this separate corporation. I mean, it's structured as a corporation, but there's a great deal of government oversight over Waterfront Toronto. And that's by design when it was created in 2002, 2003. And over the years, many, many times, the federal, provincial, and municipal governments have been very wary about giving too much power over to Waterfront Toronto. So it's very unusual as a waterfront corporation, not like the ones that we see in the UK or in the US. It's not totally independent, but it's kind of more independent than the agencies, boards, and commissions that we're used to. So what does that mean when it comes to the city? What it means is that the city holds a lot of cards, as Councillor Fletcher has already outlined. And just to add to that discussion, I'm going to talk about 4 cards that it has. 4 cards that it holds. And I would say that these cards aren't, just to be executed or just to be showed and played after Waterfront Toronto and Sidewalk Labs do their part. There's things that the city already has been doing and can do more of during this messy, complicated phase that we're in right now. So the first card that the city holds is around regulatory oversight. So when it comes to land use policy, there's a number of plans that have to be followed, including the one that is right in front of Councillor Fletcher and that you've seen part of, but there's many others as well, zoning bylaws, building standards, etc. And in addition, the second important card that the city holds is around policy creation. And these intersect very closely with what we've seen come out of the Sidewalk Labs discussion. So things like housing and affordability, community and city services, sustainability. These are all things that the city has plans for and policies for. And of course, there's data plans, which the city also has, like the open data master plan that it's developed. So there's ways in which the city has already spoken about what it wants to see happen in the city that other actors, like the ones that Julie spoke of, are subject to. The third important card that it holds is around land ownership. So the city is actually a land holder in Quayside. Part of the land is owned by Waterfront Toronto itself, and we can talk about that because I'm trying to trace that evolution. But part of it is held by the city. And so as a body that will ultimately have to agree to whatever is in the MIDP at the end of the day, the city holds some important cards there about how it can leverage that power. And then fourth, and very importantly and very messily, the city also has a number of governance levers that it can execute on a regular basis through Waterfront Toronto itself in terms of appointing board members, through its role in an intergovernmental steering committee where it meets with the provincial and federal governments, through the Waterfront Secretariat, which coordinates the city responses within the City of Toronto right now, and super importantly, as Melissa spoke of, the role that the city plays in consulting with all of us. So those things are aspects of city power that are happening. They're just happening behind the scenes. So occasionally we'll see signs of this, like for example, the excellent January 2018 report that was delivered to the executive committee, where we got a glimpse of what the city was thinking. But there's more ways, in my view, that the city could be leveraging its governance card as this plays out.
Okay, thank you very much. And we are soon going to turn it over to you to ask questions or comments or whatever. But I'm wondering if anybody on the panel has something that they really wanted to say that they didn't get a chance to say, or if you want to respond to what somebody else said before we turn it over to the audience. Is there any sort of dialogue between the panelists or any comments? No? Oh, all of a sudden you're all shy.
We're all shy.
You're not shy people, yeah, okay.
I'm just going to say that
Sure.
at the point where this is, because it's taken a very long time and it's a very big, it's very unique. There's been nothing like this that we've seen before. And I know you had something on data. I'm not an expert on data. But even the data plan is going to have to go through a city process with the chief information officer to look at all of that. And I think that at the executive, that was a moment, whenever that was, where people could have come out. But I'm not sure everybody really was that aware of what was going on at that time. But this, in a sense, it's a corporation, but it's a business corporation. It's not an agency, as you pointed out, Waterfront Toronto, even though they call it a waterfront agency. It's a business corporation, all three levels of government, and it's got a private partner. So let's say Julie wanted to develop some land with a partner, and a little piece of it was from the city. You'd have to have those conversations, but you'd go out and you'd come back with a plan. That's essentially what they're doing now. Messy, yes. Unclear, clearing up. And at a certain point, once it becomes official, that's when everything kicks in as far as everybody's ability here to make deputations, to write letters, to be part of a consultation process. But the city at this point could not have a consultation process. It's two private entities within a framework that's existed for a long time. So when East Bayfront got to a certain point, then it came in as a planning operation, and there's decisions made at City Hall. So I just want to be clear where we're at. We're just somewhere in the middle of that, I would say.
Okay, well, before we go to the audience, I can't help but add one little bit, which maybe will make you tear your hair out in frustration. Some information, a lot of it is Alex's research and company registries. So Sidewalk Labs is the mothership, and it's the entity, as far as I know, Julie, that actually is dealing with Waterfront Toronto. So there's Sidewalk Labs, a New York City company. Dan Doctoroff is the CEO of it, but he's also the CEO of a few other companies. So just to tell you how confusing it's going to be for anybody at the city, whether it's in the planning department or, Councillor Joe Cressy or anybody else, here are some of the other companies that have come into being since the initial agreement between Sidewalk Labs and Waterfront Toronto. So in October 2017, a company was incorporated in BC, the Sidewalk Master Developer Ltd., with two directors, both of whom are Google executives, and the address of that company is the Google head office in Mountain View, California. Okay. Then we have Sidewalk Canada, incorporated in BC in October of 2018. The same two Google executives are the company directors, same address. Then we have Sidewalk Toronto employees. And Alex was trying to figure out, well, are really the Sidewalk Toronto employees incorporated? Anyway, also incorporated in British Columbia with the same two Google executives. I can give you their names. If you're interested, you can show that they are Google executives. And Google HQ is the address. So Sidewalk keeps saying, oh, we're not Google. But anyway. Then, even more, There's the Sidewalk Toronto Limited Partnership, which, you know, poor Alex was exercising her legal talents to try and figure out what the heck this was. A limited partnership has a general partner and a limited partner. The general partner is none other than the first company, Sidewalk Master Developer Ltd. Okay, are you confused?
Yep.
And one more. There's a Sidewalk Developments Corporation incorporated in 2017, the only one incorporated in Ontario. And there's an administrator who I think is a lawyer with an address on Lawrence Avenue. And in the company register, you're supposed to say what the activity of the company is, right? Like, are you selling gadgets or what? It says activity, quote, not available.
Mariana, I just want to clarify. What the answer you will get is that it's not unusual for corporations to operate in limited liability companies. But what is unusual is to not have an organizational chart. So what you need to, you can't hear the first answer and not ask the second question. So if you get an organizational chart and understand, then you can see who is responsible for what. I use limited companies. It's not unusual to have a general partner. But again, if you have an organizational chart, then you can understand where the responsibility will flow and where the accountability is. So don't be dissuaded to ask business questions, or if you don't know how to ask a business question, understand that this is not conventional.
If I can just add one quick thing, just the scavenger hunt of trying to trace all these different organizations. So I contacted Waterfront Toronto and to find out more about the partnership. Because it was named in the framework agreement. So, I mean, this seems like something we could know about, we should know about. And, you know, I shared the knowledge that I had about, well, I don't think it's this, and, you know, this is who the general partner is, et cetera. And they would not give any information about the limited partnership or what Waterfront Toronto's involvement in this limited partnership was. I asked the same questions to Sidewalk Labs and also didn't get any information. And so why is this relevant? Well, it's relevant because this is positioned as a project that is in the public interest. Waterfront Toronto has used that kind of terminology in explaining why this is an important project for all of us. And so if we can't get, those of us who have the time and are paid to actually look into this stuff, if we can't get this information to share it and disseminate it, there's a problem. Because if I asked the city for this information, I would get it. And that tells us something about the transparency of this deal.
Okay, so you've been very patient, so now
And also,
it's your
Waterfront
chance.
Toronto is not subject to MFIPA.
Yeah.
So you can't FOI those
That's right.
things. Whereas once anything comes into the city, it is subject to MFIPA.
Yeah.
So
Although it's curious because the managers of Waterfront Toronto are on the sunshine list, I checked, but it's not subject to freedom of information. You know, if you're in a university, your salary's on the sunshine list, but universities are subject to provincial freedom of information rules. Usually those things go together. But yeah, Waterfront Toronto is
specifically-
not subject to
it's
freedom of
specifically
information.
excluded from FOI
Yeah, so
or anything.
it's an interesting story.
So I'm just going to say, Ange, if anybody wants to make a comment, ask questions, Ange will bring you this microphone. This is being live streamed and it will be podcast, so it's important that when you speak, you use the microphone.
Hi to everybody on the watching.
So you mentioned that Waterfront Toronto owns the Quayside lands. Can you give us some more background on why that happened, and do they own more land?
What was the question again?
Well, the question is about the Quayside land. You guys mentioned it was owned by Waterfront Toronto and not the city. So what's the story behind that?
I think the Waterfront Toronto wisely purchased lands when they were not expensive. So they are assets owned by Waterfront Toronto, but there are parts of those lands, as Councillor said, that belong to the City of Toronto. There's a roadway reconfiguration that's required, and there's a couple of private parties that actually own a piece of those lands. So those finite details haven't been sorted out, but Waterfront Toronto, I think it's the only parcel that Waterfront Toronto actually owns.
Right.
In the map that you saw that is governed by the Master Innovation Development Plan. The rest of the lands include private owners, other city lands, et cetera.
Actually, Julie, there's 4.
Four?
If you look there, there's 4 little purple dots. But the Quayside is 12.5 acres, and Waterfront Toronto owns 12 acres, they own 10.5. The city owns 1, and then there's private landowners. And in the Portlands, there's 2 small spots that they're land banking those, but they're very tiny.
I think it was Paula that said this is a very unique situation, and I do more and more this evening appreciate that. Until hearing that, though, I had been thinking that there were issues with this project that weren't dissimilar to the Metrolinx, to the Greater Toronto Transit Authority, now called Metrolinx. You know, the way decisions get made for us. Are we doing light rail? Are we doing Scarborough extensions? Are we doing downtown reliefs? And, you know, at a point you can stop listening to this. So my question is, do you see, like, is there a Venn diagram that you could imagine where you have overlapping areas of how these big multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar projects become dysfunctional?
I'll simply comment and say, I think it's quite unique. And Waterfront Toronto, you know, they've done a lot of work on the waterfront. They've done some fantastic, amazing things. And they generally are working in a precinct plan model. They're working to develop a precinct plan, and then there's a bid comes in for who's going to develop that, like or somebody already owns it, but it's in the waterfront. So there's many different ways the land comes in, but these particular lands belong to them. And they were starting out in just a regular way, and then at some point thought, well, we think these are ours, why don't we put some value added in here? So the innovation aspect and all kinds of different things started dreaming pretty big, and that's how the RFP got written in that way. So I don't really think it's a lot like Metrolinx, because I think that we're just at such a conceptual plan right now. All the precinct planning's been done for Villiers Island, it's been done for East Bayfront, it's been done for Keating, it's been done in many places. So this is what all the new things that would be added in, and then what are all the approvals for those kinds of things. I don't know if anybody saw today, the city of Markham is connected up with Bell in order to do a smart city. So all the sensors and everything else, it's pretty interesting project. I think that is where people are starting to go, and that might be the basis of these 12 acres, that they're trying to do that. But it got off to such a start in taking 712 acres instead of 12 acres and anything else Julie wants to say, but the idea of having that much land you're planning when Waterfront Toronto has the 12-acre land for the plan. So when you start off, you're always trying to recover and get back to a good place. I don't know if I answered that, but I don't think it's the same as Metro.
I mean, I don't think you did entirely, but maybe it wasn't a valid comparison.
Well, I think what's causing even an expert in business like myself is I'm confused by what is public domain and what is private domain. What is private area, and everything seems to have merged. And that's very unusual. So even when the mayor of Markham spoke about his project, he was explicit in saying that it would not engage private data. It would be managing public assets such as water flows or street traffic. I'm not sure even if he went to that point. And I'm not making a judgment call on whether that's acceptable or not. But I think in this case, we just don't know which part is public domain, which part is private domain. Will there be privately owned public vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. And after 2 years, I still think that's not explicit enough.
If I can just add, sorry, Melissa, do you want to?
No, go ahead.
If I can just add to that, I think that's a really good way of framing the problem. Is this public or is this private? And even the land question gets embroiled into that answer. Waterfront Toronto wasn't created to hold land for its own benefit. You know, it was created to be a good way of taking a lot of land that was owned by different governments and other actors and developing the waterfront, because it's really hard for any single government to be able to do that alongside the kind of messy and complicated agreement making. So this was seen as a joint project for all of these three governments to come together. So I actually haven't been able to trace, and nobody at the Waterfront Secretariat has been able to tell me how the land held in Quayside or why it was given over to Waterfront Toronto. But what I do know is that Toronto has been very explicit, the City of Toronto has been explicit that when Waterfront Toronto was supposed to get land, it was when it was project ready. It was ready for it to be, kind of used and developed, and it was close to the city approval process. So, so I'm not sure what went south in this situation, but I would be very hesitant to say that this is Waterfront Toronto's land, and therefore they should be able to do whatever they want. Not that anybody on this panel has said that, but I think that's mistaking what Waterfront Toronto is supposed to be in the city. It's supposed to be doing this work for us, for the city residents, not for its own benefit.
Yeah, and actually, one thing that makes it not like a business corporation is the fact that it's not allowed to borrow money. They've been wanting to borrow money for a long time, and they keep asking the three levels of government, oh, please, we'd like to be able to issue bonds. You know, the Port Authority of New York is busy issuing bonds all the time. Municipalities issue bonds. Transit authorities can issue bonds. Waterfront Toronto is not allowed to do that. So that makes it not like a regular business corporation. Probably Metrolinx can issue bonds. I don't know if they can, but, most entities like that can. Universities, finance themselves through a type of bond too. But Waterfront Toronto is not allowed to do it. And I think that supports what Alex is saying, which is when they talk about we own the land, they don't own the land the way I own land. Because if I owned land, I could use it as collateral and, get financing for all kinds of things. But they can't do that. They're explicitly in the enabling legislation told they are not allowed to use land as collateral, and they're not allowed to float bonds. So they're really restricted, and they were meant to hold land that, the feds would give a piece and the province would give a piece, and maybe they'd have enough money to buy a little piece or expropriate, and they were meant to hold it, and then, development would happen, but they're not meant to be a landowner in the long run, and they're not actually meant to make money in the long run, as I read the story, anyway, of Waterfront Toronto.
And in fact, they have to wind up under the existing legislation. So either 20 or 25 years after their creation, which was in 2002, 2003, they no longer are a corporation. So the idea that they're supposed to hold something forever, and become this company that's going to exist long into the future isn't why they were created or what they were intended to do.
Can I just go back to the Metrolinx? Because I think what you mean is this corporation that seems really far away, and that has a lot of study branches and layers, and different than GO, which is just gets the trains out and gets the tracks down. So the type of planning and everything's behind closed doors, and there's no FOI, whatever. It's set up in a little bit the same way, that you always feel like you want to know more, and it's perhaps sometimes harder with those types of corporations. They're not, what you said, they're not an agency, which is pretty transparent. TTC, go to the meeting, read everything, read about it in the paper. It just seems to be a little different in those two cases.
Yeah, I'm a resident actually of the waterfront area, and have been involved a number of years with different initiatives, and I found that that they have been very responsive, like over the years. But this one is as stated, very unique, and some have stated actually at the last session it was stated that's probably actually a product development lab is what they're creating. So they can, it's more than what they're doing in Markham. This is something more than that. But the one thing I do find is that when I do have questions and I bring those back to other residents, one of the things that comes up is that there is an elephant in the room, and that's Doug Ford. And people fear right away. They said, well, we should go along with this, because if we don't go along with this, we don't know what Doug Ford's going to do, and it's probably going to be worse. And so I just wonder if they could hear comments on that that issue.
I can tell you my thinking about that. I think about that a lot. So right now, I am so kind of horrified and terrified about the potential that Google might bring to the waterfront that I would actually be perfectly okay with a big ass Ferris wheel with Doug Ford's face on it and nothing but luxury condos. I'm like, that, we know what that is, you know, like there's no risk there. We know what it is. We've just, it's like, all right, well, we kind of lost it and that sucks.
I'll just
but
text him and tell him. Waterfront.
it's all
Ferris
there,
wheel is
Dougie.
on. Ferris wheel is on.
So I feel like that if that's the worst case scenario, I'm actually totally okay with it. What I kind of wonder is if Doug Ford is going to and Google is going to recognize the potential to just do away with all. So basically pull a Bill 66. So that was with the open for business bylaw where it's like here, municipality, you're allowed to issue create this open for business designation or something on this one project that will allow that project to ignore every regulation on the books, basically. Or at least that's what's possible. So if Google and Doug Ford, and maybe I hope there are no operatives in this room, have this conversation, Google could actually say, hey, Doug, you can be my new best friend, and why don't you do this and basically override everything and just expedite that process and actually make it possible, because right now it would actually get held up by a lot of municipal and provincial red tape. So these are my two kind of directions where yeah, Doug Ford could make this a little bit less scary, or he could make it a whole lot more scary.
Can I just say, I've been through some of the scary parts there, that there was the Auditor General report on Waterfront Toronto itself, and the last recommendation is about how, well, you've probably all read it, but it's further study on the activities of Waterfront Toronto and Sidewalk. It's consult through government on the roles and responsibilities government ministries and agencies could have during the development, implementation, and operation of a smart city, to protect the public's interest, establish the policy framework through legislation for the development of a smart city in Ontario that addresses intellectual property, data collection, ownership, security, and privacy. So the AG's report actually has gone quite deep into saying if you're going to have a site that's a smart city site, we have to look at that not only for there, but for the city, for the province of Ontario, and it's a pretty in-depth study. I would say for Waterfront Toronto, which is a corporation I've supported for years and gone to bat for very often, corporations often go into difficulties, and when you have the number of people that resigned from a board, you know that there's some conflict or something in that. And then when you have the government removing its board members, this is a really difficult moment. So I think we just have to stay focused, stay clear, and bring this project into the public realm and have a very clear oversight on all the pieces of it, which, as people are pointing out, is hard because there's so many subsidiary companies. But I don't think at the moment that we should say, well, we just can't do anything because we're worried about Doug Ford. I don't think that's...
Paula, ask you a favor?
Sure.
The first thing is when I looked on the website today, it actually says Quayside/Sidewalk. I fought for 1.5 years that it should only say Quayside. So the project...
It shouldn't actually say Quayside/Sidewalk.
Right, so thank you. If you could make a point of changing that, I think it's really important
Which
for the
website?
public.
The
It's just-
city?
So I'm really proud that the city did the
Oh.
did the
let me
website.
get that fixed.
Thank you very much. That's the first favor. The second favor is for 35 years,
Wow.
whether you like my industry or not, we submitted applications that had all these checklists of documents that needed to be taken to task, dimensions, specificity, expert third-party reports. I'm having a difficult time understanding 2 years later how we're considering something of this scale without specificity.
Because there's no planning application of any kind.
And why hasn't that planning application been made? Why is the city still engaging in discussions until that? I can't go into the city rightfully more than 1 or 2 times to discuss in a speculative way what I'm thinking about. And that should be that way until I put my money where my mouth is and put my application in with all the third-party evidence to substantiate the changes. And so at what point, if we're still another year away,
Right.
will this happen? I think that's really relevant to everyone.
Well, I think that the MIDP, can I call it that? Everybody knows what it is now, Master Implementation Development Plan, will spell out a whole number of things and include how any development applications would come forward. So there is a precinct plan, there's some heights and density that are already in place. There's a plan that they've written up but not submitted. It's the one, I'm not really here to talk about Quayside, talk about the Portlands, but kind of a site plan. But it's not a formal site plan like you would think of a site plan, nor would you have to submit that. It's a concept drawing. I think everything's right now at a concept. The one thing that is stated in all the documents, as can happen anytime, are these pilots. There's supposed to be 4 pilots. One of them is this little cute little thing. That's a shuttle. It's an artificially intelligent shuttle that rides you from Union Station to Cherry Beach. Now, has anybody been on that? No, because
Does it
seen
exist?
it? No. There are pilots. There's one about clearing the street. These are the 4 pilots that are in this. Clearway, special event. Get out of the way, we're going to tow your car. That's one of the pilots. These are pilots that are suggested by Sidewalk for anywhere. So this little one, this is a little car that's going in the Portlands. That's part of
Well,
their idea.
but Paul, it's not going in the
No, no,
Portlands.
no, no.
It's not.
This is what they
Just
could do.
in
Tomorrow,
somebody's
this is their
imagination.
plan to have pilots, but I've not heard of any pilots yet. There's the Smart Shoot pilot and one, so there's just these things that they say they want to test things with pilots, and those are the 4 things that they want.
Would they need to be approved by the city before they're actually piloted?
Well, I don't know about the AI car, although you're driving through the mouth of the Don naturalization, which is one big construction site. So I wouldn't really, I'm advising against going on that shuttle at the moment. But the one where you put up the signs that say we're clearing the road, that would have to be the city. The one where you're going to go into a pay-as-you-throw in an apartment building, which is a shoot where if you, that would not require city approval, which was just part of waste management. So these are ideas that are actually publicly documented as things that they say they want to try out. FYI, that's all I can say.
We got quite a few.
Hi. Is this okay? It's working better now. So this is a question related to the power part of your whose money, land, and power. In my research time on this particular project, I've seen 2 things that I'd like you to address, so just as a framing. One is the process of moving from naivete to knowledge in this project, which I think anybody who touches this thing, at least that I've seen, as almost like a multi-stage process of having their blinders taken off like many times. And then the second part is what motivates, what's the motivation of that the person who's participating has in this. So with that framing, looking at the city and the potential business models that I've seen so far come out of Sidewalk, which I would say top 2 that I've seen. One is the government procurement of surveillance technology, and the second one is the implementation of self-driving cars traffic system along as a model. So looking at the city's responsibility in that, we know that there are lobbyists that have been really heavily engaged with politicians and also with regulatory bodies. We know that most politicians who've touched this either won't touch it or have been sort of bought into silence or chosen to be silent or think that they don't understand it. So I'm trying to understand what the political dimension of this, like city councillors, city's relationship with the province, city's relationship with the feds, how do you see them navigating this sort of naivete to knowledge and the motivation of these departments? For example, like the City of Toronto has a CAV, or like a connected autonomous vehicle section, has some motivation to have these, potentially could be a procurer of surveillance technology. So like, where do you see the politicians, I guess it's primarily to Paula, but others as well, like figuring into this? I still don't understand the city's response politically. You talked about the 4 cards: regulatory oversight, policy creation. Yeah, so we have policy creation that might actually go along with what Sidewalk wants. So I'm looking for like public accountability. Where do you see it sitting in that?
I'll start and others can get in. This is, at the moment, Waterfront Toronto with its partner that they selected through an RFP. So this is their process, and it's not yet at the city as far as any approvals of anything. There are precinct plans that exist across the Portlands, across East Bayfront. There are transit plans that are already there, the Waterfront LRT that runs all the way into the Portlands. So this is not a blank page. In other words, you don't run your own transit system. I don't know about these AI vehicles running around. I don't know if you need that approval, whatever. I just think that these are things people are dreaming up. But where the rubber hits the road will be with the Master Implementation Development Plan, which will have to be a public plan and up for public consultation and discussion for everybody in this room to come to say what's right, what's wrong. That will include all the data and the data oversight. So that's going to be a long conversation. This thing is a little far behind in general, but it all has to be done and submitted by September 2019, or everything's over, just done. I don't think there'll be too many more extensions. If people have concerns, they can always write to the mayor about this. I would always suggest that you flag your concerns in any way to the mayor and the local waterfront politicians that you have a problem, whether it's federal, provincial, or city. But the majority of the approvals that will be required here will be city approvals, the same as the Portlands for all of the sewers, water, density, heights, transit, everything. Those are all approvals, but we are nowhere near that thing. Julie will tell you if she dreams something up and brings it in as a planning application, the city might say, oh, I'm sorry.
Go and draw this up with a ruler.
Or you bring it in.
Right?
Or if you come in and you're trying to rezone something that isn't rezone employment lands for a Walmart, okay, the answer is no. So just because people are drafting it doesn't make it real at this point. It's just, in my opinion, there's many more hoops, many more checks, many more balances, and at some point, it will all include everybody that has any concern to document that and speak about it. I'm sure you're all following this very, very closely.
Can I just add a different perspective? Is that okay?
Well, I'm just wondering, because we have a lot of people who want to speak, and so I don't want to cut you off, but if Ange can continue, but please try and be short.
Can I say something?
Okay. You can say something.
I'll say something really, really short.
And then other people be short.
So there's other examples of cities that have set the policy framework around smart city design before a proponent like Sidewalk Labs has come in. And so just to make it really pithy so Mariana doesn't like cane me off the stage, I don't think Waterfront Toronto and Sidewalk Labs should be setting the policy around what is a smart city and how Quayside should be developed. I think the city needs to take a leadership role, particularly on the privacy and data side. And the fact that it's waiting for the MID to be presented next September, to me, is a huge gap in leadership.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
Can I make a comment about economic development? Construction inherently makes lots of jobs. So when we look at the economic development numbers, Paula, I hope that we can differentiate between the jobs that would have already been created by the wonderful investment by the 3 levels of government versus the value-added jobs that could be created. Because we get very generic numbers, And based on industry verification, you can find this by statisticians. Each unit produces, I think, 2 job per year. And that means that those alone would have been created by construction.
Right.
Yeah, and we're not having this conversation. We could, but not yet. As far as the housing proposal goes, what I thought was really interesting, so I was reviewing it yesterday, was that Waterfront Toronto in the RFP, and then later, even in the presentation that they gave at the last roundtable in December, said that their goal was to have more affordable housing built than what they are mandated to produce, which is 20% affordable on any site. And Sidewalk then went on in the same roundtable presentation to say that they were only producing 20%, and even that was really vague and fuzzy. So they aren't even in agreement with each other about what's happening on that housing side. And so again, like if Sidewalk wasn't involved in this at all, it's possible that we would actually have more affordable housing being built than what they are bringing to the table.
So, hi everyone. So my question is once again maybe on the procurement process, the overall procurement process that seems to be very awkward, I believe. How Google or Alphabet got acquainted to Waterfront Toronto and ultimately the city? That's basically my question.
Can you repeat it, please? Can't
Yeah,
hear
the
very
question was about how it was that Google somehow,
Got acquainted to
Yeah.
to the city, to Waterfront Toronto,
well,
and to the city.
Alex and I interviewed a few people about this, and we can't divulge the names, but they're very knowledgeable people from the private sector and the public sector. And both of us told us that they were clearly off the record conversations between senior members of the Ottawa government and senior folks at Google. Well, the RFP came later, all the waterfront stuff. Anyway, so we can't say, more than that, but I mean, we're not the only ones who've
I
said
think-
this. So who knows? But, ultimately, it doesn't really matter that much. The point is, okay, it's Google companies that are here, and they're proposing all of these things. And what do we want to do about it? Do we just want to wait and then wait for them to come up with a plan, or do we want to take a more proactive role, whatever? So, there's this sort of story of what happened and whether it was Google that approached Ottawa or the other way around.
I think since I was there on the board, I can say that there was an RFP process. Waterfront Toronto had to clarify that, in fact, the board did not approve the proponent. They just corrected that on the website. The proponent was approved by management. There was no vote by the board to approve the specific winner. What the board voted upon is the framework agreement that binds the parties. So it's very important to note, though, in legal documents, it says very explicitly that Waterfront Toronto confirms that the RFP process was sound. So you can only deal with what you've got in front of you. I think what's really important is the accountability from the time this process was awarded. I think that's where the best place to spend time is, and where is the accountability from that point forward.
Sorry, can you hang on one sec? I can't hear you.
I mean, ultimately, there's other projects around the world that are being subject to a normal procurement process. I'm thinking about, I believe in Norway, there's currently an ongoing project where there was a clear procurement process. And how come that here in Toronto, this, procurement process was awkward, difficult, like...
And we should accept it, right? Like, why? Yeah, you got to talk to the mic if you have something to say.
I actually have a question. So to Julie, on the board, how did we get here? Where that, like, how involved was the board in developing that RFP?
I'm bound, obviously, by fiduciary responsibility, and I've been extremely careful to respect Waterfront Toronto.
What you're allowed to say. I don't
Yeah,
mean-
exactly. I know. I don't mean to give you the preamble.
We don't want you to get sued.
No, I don't want to give you the preamble. I can say that the RFP was probably crafted by a group of experts in conjunction with management, and that the first time I, as chair of investment and real estate, was made aware of the winner was very close to the announcement. And I was not on the steering committee. There was a steering committee, and I think those names are public as to how that decision came about. Then, within a few days of an announcement, the framework agreement, this is public, was brought to me, and certainly 3 days was not enough for me to make a sound decision, and I voted in dissent. But that's as fast as it happened.
Thank you. Thank you all for taking the time to do this panel and answer our questions. I'll keep this really brief. It's just a point of clarification around Councillor Fletcher. When you're referring to the MIDIP, you're saying it's the master implementation plan. I was under the understanding that's the master innovation plan. I was hoping if you can clarify that.
I'm sorry. Thank
Okay,
you.
no problem. And what does that mean in terms of how do you vet a master innovation plan?
Well, I guess we're going to find out. They're looking at the terms of reference. Right?
It's a term they made up. It's not like a sort of normal planning law.
Yeah. It's not like
term.
an RFP or something. We all know what that means.
There's a lot of other things that are standard, like an RFP has a request for proposals, has to do certain things. There's all kinds of plans that Julie, has submitted to the city planning department. They have certain names. It can be a plan for a smaller area, a bigger area. There's a lot of standard language that's used so that you know what you're talking about. But in this particular instance, we're getting documents with names that nobody's ever heard of and that don't have any meaning in law.
It's not a legal name. I think that's
Yeah,
what you're saying.
and they are developing an evaluation process. I'm losing track of when things are coming out, but I think it was around the last roundtable where they did start talking about how they would be, and like how Waterfront would be evaluating that master innovation development plan. So if you go onto the Sidewalk Toronto website, all of the documents are there, and you can look at it and actually see what some of those criteria are, but they're really vague. Like in the original RFP, they also talk about how proposals are going to be evaluated, and again, there's a breakdown, but it's really vague, and it's it doesn't. I don't know. It seemed like it was really arbitrary and super subjective to me.
That's a good point.
Sorry, just a reminder, if anybody has a question, you gotta get my attention, and I'll bring the mic over to you.
Hi, I would like to talk about the waterfront. And I think the waterfront is really quite a very special place in our city, and has a fantastic history, and anything that goes on there is very unusual, very unique, and very important. And I think Waterfront Toronto has, as a consequence, I think the waterfront should primarily be in public hands and owned by the public. And I think the Waterfront Toronto has essentially privatized most of the waterfront, except for the water's edge. But I don't think that's sufficient. And on top of that, the planning regime that's evolved over the last 150 years or so has dealt primarily with developers who are in the game because they're making profits from the buildings that they've constructed. This project is making money from the data that it is going to be generated. And it's a very logical next step for Google, and it's the way it makes money. But I don't think there's any planning regime that is in place that knows how to deal with this kind of a situation, especially on the waterfront. So I guess my question is, how do you deal with it?
The data? Everything?
corporation that makes its
Oh.
money from producing data.
You know, that you've focused on, maybe somebody else, I'll just go quickly. You've focused on a really integral piece. I'm not a data expert or open data or anything else, but this innovation plan is going to deal, the one that they call the innovation plan, is going to deal with that. How will we work with data? What will happen with data? Who will own data, et cetera? We're all waiting to find out what the proposal is.
Actually, if
think-
I can sort of add a little comment here, I think it could only have happened on the waterfront. Because if Google had thought, gee, you know, there's all this land up near York University or something, we want a smart city there. No way that would have happened, because anybody in the city, whether it's the local councillor or the planning department, would have said, you're dreaming in Technicolor if you want to plan your own city. And what Dan Doctoroff said, he was quoted in the Globe and Mail at the photo op that started this whole thing. And he said, well, we always wanted to be given a city so we could do what we want in it. I mean, he was very open about it. So it could only have happened on the waterfront, which, because only Waterfront Toronto is secretive enough and unaccountable enough that they could have done this deal. Because anywhere else, you'd have a municipality, right? You could have gone to North Toronto or Oshawa or Pickering. You would have had a municipality, a city council, and it wouldn't have got anywhere. I mean, Google already went to 50 American cities that all turned it down.
But up until this project, Waterfront, I don't know, is it on? Up until this project, Waterfront Toronto has been reasonably open in its dealings, and it was known for its citizen participation programs. So, I mean, this is a dramatic turn.
It is.
It is. Yeah, we don't know why. We don't know why Waterfront Toronto has approached this project in a way that's so different from how it's done projects before. I mean, we can all speculate, you know, is it leadership? Is it the impending, you know, end of Waterfront Toronto? So wanting to have a different kind of model. It had a whole kind of a framework of Waterfront 2.0 that it pitched to the three governments that they ultimately pruned down quite significantly. So is it that?
Maybe it has something to do with the Liberals.
Yeah, maybe it's pressure from the federal government. We don't really know why, but what we do know is exactly what you said at the beginning, which is that the waterfront is a gem in Toronto. It's a very special part of the city, and we shouldn't have to wait until the MIDP is drafted in September to see what the fate of our waterfront is going to be. That's not acceptable.
I want to add something for clarity. The first and this subsequent agreement are still in a lot of language conditional. And so if you wonder why anyone would have voted for it, it's because they knew that it had conditional provisions in it. I think the issue is the accountability and the transparency, and how long does that go before there is accountability and transparency. You can't, well, you can, but I would say it's harder to say to someone, why try, as opposed to try, but please tell me how this is going to work. And I think that there's some things that have come out of this in terms of the footprint, the environmental footprint, and the cross-laminated timber that we can consider as options in terms of carbon capture that are interesting. And that's why the city says, gee, that's really neat. But now you say we've got the tallest we've got the tallest cross-laminated timber building already in British Columbia. We've got the largest in Montreal. We've got amazing Canadian expertise at this. So then why are the Canadians not doing this project? So it really comes to not whether you tried, but at what point does it become accountable?
I'm really glad I sat in on this panel to listen to it, because I'm not that well versed as a Torontonian, and shame on me. One of the things that's coming from you all is this sense of complexity, and boy, quite a challenging first step to try to grasp that. The gentleman over here kind of took some of the framework I was going at, maybe just to continue a little bit more, because especially with this, Mrs. Fletcher, you were talking about the strength of Waterfront Toronto, how you have a lot of respect for it, and a lot of you have been worried, why the change? And why is that happening? I'm wondering is there anything that, because it's a new idea, is there somehow a little apprehension because it's some new ideas, even though you're saying 50 American cities turned it down, but is there something in this new way of exploring that there might be just an initial reaction to it? A lot of it seems to be the secrecy, the lack of accountability, lack of the publicness, and I would agree that the city is going to be a final decider. It should actually almost invite participation because it's going to control some of the frameworks. So if they're coming with a proposal way out in left field, then they're going to have to go through all the hoops that the city's going to have to approve it. It's shameful that maybe the city wasn't more involved. I'm not sure if that's an accurate assessment. But is it part because it's new and it's just difficult to deal with? Would that be part of it?
Yeah, but it's not new. And I think Julie was kind of pointing to this when she said, oh, they talk about how they're going to build, tall buildings out of wood, which is against provincial regulations, but they think regulations are, for the birds. But in fact, it's not new. And driverless vehicles are not new. And those garbage chutes are not new. So all of the, I don't know this for myself because I'm not a tech person, but all of the tech people who've looked at their proposals say, actually, all of those things exist other places. So all they're doing is throwing stuff together from here and there and everywhere into this big plan and trying to impress people with the veneer of newness, technological innovation. Only we can innovate. Well, I'm reading a wonderful book called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, which has been widely reviewed, probably seen reviews in the Globe and so on. If you read that, you want to even delete your Gmail account, and you certainly don't want to buy more Google anything because you realize how it's working and how it makes money. So there's a veneer of newness, but there is, in fact, nothing new about it. Probably the mayor of Markham, who was on the news this morning saying, oh, we teamed up with IBM or whoever, and we have these sensors, or Bell, I think IBM was involved too anyway, IBM probably made the sensors, so that we know where there's leaks in the water pipes before we get a flood. I thought, well, there's a really good idea. But, it's about leaks, sort of detecting leaks in water pipes before you get the flood. Well, that might be new, and maybe it's not new, but if it is new, it's a great invention. But what isn't new is all this sort of general talk about, oh, we're going to build a smart city, and we don't really know what we're going to put in it, and we don't own the land. Who knows? There's a lot of showmanship, shall we say?
There's another example that Bill Gates, I believe, bought his own town. So it's one thing to go and buy your land and experiment, but I think it's another thing to experiment in the public domain.
Truly, I believe that the original RFP that outlined that little 12 acres and the 700 more, that is really why that agreement came to be with Google. That if you said, here, it's only 12 acres, come to town, they would not have been that interested. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't really clear or fair at the beginning, because it's one thing to own your 12 acres and have an RFP for them. It's another thing to have basically an RFP over somebody else's land, which is basically the city's land, and with a framework already in place, the Portland's planning, everything done. So I think that was what was anticipated or expected, and that is actually, if I was Google, that's what I would still want. I would want that, and I would be doing whatever I could do to try to get that, because a few buildings made out of wood, a few sensors in the street, that's not really what you came to town for. Very small.
Not enough data there.
Well, not very big. For the biggest corporation, it's a tiny site, so they are interested in a large, large site, and I think they thought that's what they were getting.
So we have time for 2 more comments, I think.
So I'll make it quick. It sounds to me like we're talking about the corporatization of democracy. The public moved towards a more deliberative form of democracy with a little bit of panic on the part of elected officials for many years. The public has come to appreciate the possibility of engaging in public consultation. This feels like a marketing plan without the public consultation to me. So I'm curious that this is maybe a bit of a smokescreen where democracy is being, I don't know what the word is. Hornswoggled will do, thank you.
Hornswoggled? You heard it here. How many people have been to a consultation at Waterfront Toronto, one of the big ones on different things? Everybody? Not everybody? Who hasn't been? Oh, lots of people. So there are these consultations. I think you should all, if you're interested, start coming out. Did everybody put their name down somewhere to get back in touch with you? Yes? No? Maybe not? What's that? We'd like to capture your data tonight.
But we could talk about it.
But I think, yeah, I mean, it's definitely marketing. And the fact that it's Google who has been, like, they are organizing the public consultations. I mean, how could it not be marketing? You know, the Waterfront Toronto put them in the position to do marketing. It's kind of ridiculous. So.
Hi. So far, we've spoken quite a bit about the municipal perspective on this project and how citizens can become engaged with it. But one of the things that comes to mind is that it seems to me there's 3 levels of government that are potentially involved and stakeholders in this project. And when looking at the federal government, particularly in the context of surveillance capitalism, the immediate thing that comes to mind is national security related issues. And I think that my gut feeling is that some of the opacity around this process might potentially have something to do with that. And if that's the case, how would we, as citizens on the municipal level, go about peeling back the layers of the curtain to see what's actually going on with respect to decision-making about it?
I don't have an answer, but there was this article that came out late last year, I think, about Google Earth that talks about that. I mean, there's a reason why I'm terrified of Google, like, owning and operating a site, like, at all in Toronto. But then, I mean, the size of the Portlands is the same as the size of downtown Toronto. That's the scale of land that we're talking about. And this Google Earth article was talking about the deals that Google was brokering with federal governments around surveillance and, like, the military industrial complex and all of this stuff. And it was really, really scary. So, and I have no idea how you find out what's happening. I mean, the fact that we're pretty sure that the federal liberal government brought us this project to begin with scares the bejesus out of me. And again, like, I have no idea how to find out what's going on or do anything about it.
Oh, well, no, they were really short, so we can have more.
I'm interested in the custodian. There was a report indicating that maybe the Toronto Public Library should be the custodian of the data. I was thinking good alternatives might be the actual city of Toronto, or might be Toronto's large 3 universities. I'm just wondering if that's also a partial good way of cutting out Google's profit motive. Because I have heard from very reliable sources that the actual reason for Google doing this is just a test case, and they're not interested in the land, they're not interested in the buildings, they're interested in recycling the technology that they can create in other parts of the world. They know they're not going to be well received in the United States or Britain, but they're probably going to do fairly fine in a lot of other smaller government. So I'm just wondering if there are any opinions on the data custodian.
Yeah, maybe I can just speak to that, quickly. What this is referring to is that there was a report by the Board of Trade, interestingly enough, that basically was saying Waterfront Toronto doesn't do much, doesn't understand intellectual property and digital stuff. And they should be essentially replaced for the data part of the project, not for the real estate, by the Toronto Public Library. So I'm not sure what I think about it. I'm not the right person to think about it, but I think it's interesting. The Board of Trade was suggesting the public library become the partner. Brenda, I don't know. We have Brenda here from the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. She's our data surveillance and privacy legal expert. Have you got any opinions on the public library and the Board of Trade proposal? Because I can't see anybody else here who's more qualified to answer that than you.
The public library might do a perfectly adequate job of being a data steward. They're certainly more publicly accountable than the Sidewalk proposal, which is some sort of amorphous civic data trust that's not grounded in a civic institution, but is going to be created out of whole cloth. And there's a lot of background behind that proposal. But all of the data trust or digital stewardship questions are in part probably a smokescreen for data that is not going to matter enough to Sidewalk or to Google to care about, because that's not what they're trying to monetize here. They're trying to monetize the technologies that will collect the data in other places, as you inferred. And the kinds of data that are being discussed for the data trust are what they're calling urban data, which is a new category of data that Sidewalk has created. That's basically de-identified data collected in the public space of Quayside. The data that's monetizable is the kind of data that's connected to you as an identified human, or to your location, from things like your phone, based on an operating system owned by Google, for many of us, that may integrate with the kinds of data that are potentially going to be collected in Quayside. And so the de-identified pieces will be in the data trust, and they'll be open, and the profitable kinds of data will be the data that are integrated with that data from privately held assets. That's my take on that issue.
So we just have a few minutes. I don't know what final thoughts any of the panelists have, or ideas for going forward or anything like that. Oh, okay.
So, thank you. I have a kind of a comment. I'm someone who knows nothing about this, has no expertise in this, just the kind of interest. What I know is kind of what I hear at something like, I haven't been to any of the Sidewalk Labs consultations, but what I've heard here and at the previous panel, and what I read in the paper and occasionally see on TV or whatever. And it seems to me that it's being presented constantly as a fait accompli. And even hearing people talk here tonight, they talk about it as if it's actually already decided, it's already happening. And I find that really frightening. I pictures of the mayor and the prime minister and stuff standing at the waterfront talking about it. It's really scary. And as you all keep telling us, it's not actually happening. So how do we get that message out, that it's not already been decided? It's not, and all the little baubles are dangling about driverless cars and smart. I hate that word smart, because it's not very smart most of the time. So anyway, that's just really a comment to say we've got to stop acting as if it's already a decided deal.
I wouldn't mind adding that if you look very carefully in the agreements, Waterfront Toronto indemnifies the 3 levels of government, which I think complicates things even more. Well, I think it's important to note then that if there's an indemnification in that direction, you wonder then, will the 3 levels of government be accountable? So the more accountable the 3 levels of democratically elected government can be, the better this is going to be.
Anybody else?
I feel like Alex was pointing towards some opportunities for intervention, and I wonder if she could lay those out, or maybe that you don't, in which case you don't have to. That's a big burden.
I mean, I think we really need to applaud 2 main parties up till now. One is actually the media, and one is all of the activists who have been tirelessly going to meetings and raising issues. And I think the combination of these two things, I'd throw you in the advocate category, by the way, even if that's not a label you would necessarily want. But
to that point, I want to mention that journalism took on an extraordinarily precious meaning in the fall of 2017, when out of the blue, after the vote, a journalist from Australia wrote for the Guardian about Toronto, what are you doing? And I thought, wow, that was really powerful, because you saw a journalist who was ear to the ground, and then all the other journalists, I'm sure simultaneously, but coincidentally, and accumulated in terms of the message. So it was so much of a profound relief to know that journalists were there.
And I think that's exactly right. But I also think that it's unreasonable for the burden to fall on those two parties and not fall on the democratic governments that we have elected to oversee our interests. And in particular, in this case, what happens in city spaces. And so I think the pressure, in my view, should be very squarely directed at the City of Toronto to take a leadership role in advance of the MIDP being presented to them, and think more broadly about what a smart city in Toronto means, and how approvals for these kinds of initiatives are meant to happen. I don't think we can expect these other parties who are really doing it off the sides of their desks in many cases, especially for advocates, to be the ones bearing the responsibility. So I'm sorry, Councillor Fletcher, but I really think we need to be turning our gaze to the city and asking over and over again what they're doing about this.
And we should add, for those people who don't know it, that Councillor Joe Cressy has been named as, I guess, the mayor's representative on the board of Waterfront Toronto. So you can go and harass him. I intend to do so. But I think a lot of people don't know who to talk to. And I think it's good to also email the mayor, because they really do keep track of those emails. But, there's other people. And at this point, city staff, as Councillor Fletcher pointed out, aren't really in any position to do much. But the elected politicians, if they get wind of increasing, resistance, that could have an impact. And as to the question somebody asked, well, what about the province and the feds? Well, that's a whole other story. Jim?
Just one other thing. At the federal level, one of the few members of parliament who's taken a genuine interest in this, and I think is worth approaching, is Charlie Angus, who's an NDP member from the north. Ironically, very good around these issues, and I think it's worthwhile to reach out to him and share your views.
Can I add to that? Sorry, I'm trying to make this as nonpartisan as possible. I was a Liberal appointee and I'm a small C Conservative, and I've served Bob Rae. So why I mention that is there's 3 members of Parliament in Canada, should make us extraordinarily proud, who went to London, England, from all 3 parties to cross-examine Facebook. And so Canadians have shown extraordinary leadership. I think, and Charlie Angus has done an extraordinary job. I'm not trying to diminish that. I believe Zimmer, Angus, and the third, and I'm so sorry, is a Toronto councillor. And there are 3 parties representing Canadians, which would be extraordinarily proud in cross-examinations in London, England.
I think, interestingly for me, the notion of the data and starting to frame how it should be used, collected, what's being collected, all those issues that you're raising outside of the 12 acres, because that really is the application they're looking at to go further. That conversation, I agree with you. We should start that early so people are able to think about that and have opinions that can feed into the MDIP or wherever we're calling it.
If it ever happens. Some of us are hoping it won't. So.
Well, no matter what, it's a pretty important discussion, because it's taking place it's taking place only by these folks. And I think that's really my takeaway, is that it should be taking place as a larger democratic discussion, people have to bring their ideas, and I think that's a good plan from tonight.
What committee would that fit under?
Well, either executive or government management and licensing. We just have all new committees. Doug Ford did slice us in half. You know, we're just landing, actually, in the last 6 to 8 weeks, getting everything pulled together. But I'm happy to just think about what the best route is to start that discussion in a more official way at the municipal level.
Okay, so we need to certainly thank the panelists very much. Thank you. And we also need to thank the School of Journalism. Alex was saying how important it is to, you know, that media, you know, there's all kinds of critical media that has exposed a lot of what has been going on in this as in other things. And I think we should be grateful that there's a School of Journalism that supports these kind of events and that is out there. And, you know, we should thank Jim too for organizing the Center for Free Expression and making sure free expression does actually happen. I think it really happened tonight, so I was very pleased to have been part of this, and we look forward to more discussions about issues, whether they be of local democracy or similar things. So thank you all for coming.